Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5e and the use of traps. Now you can check out traps in your Dungeon Master's Guide on page 120 to 121 and 122 and 123 I believe. But essentially from a page about 120 it gives you some details, and obviously traps have there's a whole variety of them. You can have a mechanical trap, you can have magical traps, they have triggers, they might have resets features to them, you have to disable them, there's a chance to detect them. The trap might be more about just setting back the party or being dangerous or being deadly. Now, my use of traps in my game is very sparse. I do not put a lot of traps in my game because, one, I don't really think that if you're dealing with a castle that they would set the whole place up with a whole bunch of traps. They've got to live there. The last thing they need to do is forget that there was a trap on a door or a chest and kill themselves. Okay? So, I put them where I think people really want to keep people out of that location. Not just keep them out of that location, but I tend to use traps not as a setback and not as a dangerous situation, but more as a deadly situation. That's why I have so few traps. And it also means that the usual process, the macro that players will use, which is search the door or for traps. If it's got a trap and it's trapped, then disable it and then open the door. And we're going to use the same macro on every single door and every location we move into, and it can be very boring. I want my players to get complacent so that when they do come against a trap or get into a situation where there is one, it's going to be bad for them and they will have forgotten to do anything about it. And I will place it in a location that is not normally where you would put the trap. Traditionally, we tend to put traps in locks on doors, and that's where the trap and the trigger is, and often that's not a particularly good location for them to be. Now, because I use so few traps and because my traps are so deadly, that means as a general rule when my traps go off, someone is going to be unconscious or someone will die. And that's really the intention initially of traps when the game of Dungeons & Dragons 5e was set out, was you come across a trap, you don't like them because they are deadly in nature. You don't have to run your game that way, but that's generally how I do it. Otherwise, I have to track a whole lot of traps. Otherwise, it just feels like they lose a few hit points, they get a condition, it's just a resource, it's just burning up their resources, which you can use traps like that. But I feel like traps are like a mini skill challenge because the process is, whether we like it or not, right now for Dungeons & Dragons 5e, is perception check or wisdom check to detect if there is a trap, or use detect magic if it's a magical, possibly a magical trap in that location, to see where it is and what it is. You won't find out very much. It'll be pretty much that it is there, and sort of the school of magic. That's it. Then we have the investigation check to figure out, once we know that there is a trap there, how to disable it and what sort of trap it is. That's sort of requiring an intelligence check or an investigation check. So there's the second part of your skill challenge. And then the last part of the skill challenge, number 3, is disabling it, that dexterity check. Now, I often use a sleight of hand check. I'm perfectly fine with using sleight of hand if people are proficient in sleight of hand. But usually when you're disabling a trap, particularly if there's a lock system, you need to have thieves' tools. But not all traps can be disabled by thieves' tools. Traps can come in many shapes, forms, and have different natures. So thieves' tools to disable might not necessarily be suitable for your particular trap if you have created one. Now, there are a whole bunch of traps. I've already explained to you now that it's essentially a mini skill challenge, but it is a boring skill challenge. Essentially, one person's doing it, the rogue. And what's the point of a trap, whatever it is, if they're pretty much going to always find it? The whole point of putting a trap somewhere is that you don't find it. So why would you set your perception check to find it so low? I set mine quite high. Most of my checks required to find a trap, it's hard to find. So that's DC 20. If somebody takes the observant feat, it's a good chance, if they have a very high wisdom and have proficiency in wisdom or perception checks, that they are going to be able to detect that trap. That doesn't guarantee they'll figure out how to disable it, but they will at least be able to find it. And those are the rare situations. Other times, my players, they get caught in the trap because they do not detect the trap. Okay? So you have the collapsing roof, you have falling nets, you have fire-breathing statues or fire-breathing holes, you have pit traps, you have the poison dart, you have the needle trap, you have the rolling sphere or boulder, the murder boulder, you have the sphere of annihilation, but you can make up other traps that you find more interesting. And look, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail in this video about how to do that, but what I would say to you is when you create a trap, you want it to be sort of like another encounter. And if you can draw more people into that, that's a good thing. I have a real problem with traps being used as a constant thing. They should really be quite rare. And in places where really the person wants to kill your character or whoever goes into that location and then dispose of the body in some way so that their loot, their treasure, their precious is not taken away. I'm going to do a series of videos on this. And I don't want to do all of it right now because there's too much to cover. There are a lot of really good videos on YouTube about how to make traps in Dungeons and Dragons more interesting. Tabletop Terrors, Nerd Anarchy, and I believe there's a couple of other sort of more independent, smaller channels that have done them. DM Info, I believe, has a nice selection of videos on the topic as well. I'm going to present some stuff myself, but yeah, the whole point of a trap, like I said, is you shouldn't be able to detect it. The whole point is that they get caught in it, so you wouldn't make it easy to find. And when it does go off, it really should be lethal in nature, possibly fatal. And that's not very nice for a low-level character. But by the time they get to level 5, 6, they've got Revivify and they can get people back up. It's not an issue. But the trap is still dangerous. Okay? Look, if you found this video helpful or informative, please share, like and subscribe. Make a comment below and tell me how you approach traps. Do you use a lot of them? Do you just use sparingly? Do you make them as setbacks? Do you make them dangerous? Or do you prefer your traps deadly? And if there is any questions about traps, ask them and I will try to make a video about that particular topic and build out a bit of a library of information on it. Until next time, keep rolling those 20s.